Hi everyone, it's a beautiful day, and I hope you are all having a great time at the comfort of your own homes. This is Teacher Kevin Domingo once again, your kind of K.
We can go serious. We can go funny. We can go real. We can go fancy. But every time I teach, I do it with sincerity. This is DepEd TV.
Last time, we've talked about the birth of genetics and the person behind this discovery.
We also learned that what we are in terms of genes and physical appearance is a product of our parents and the generations before them. That we are a heterozygote organism that has an observable characteristics such as our hairstyle, eye color, our skin complexion, earlobes, and even our height. That is how the law of segregation works. Fantastic! Remember the picture of the baby we flashed on the previous episode? The facial features of the baby seem to be similar to that of his dad. How about you? Where did you get your looks? And finally, we also discussed a systematic tool that can be used in predicting the possible outcome of a given cross, and that is the Punnett square.
Today, we are going to explore the different inheritance patterns beyond the Mendelian genetics. You will also learn the different patterns of modified Mendelian ratios. This is a type of inheritance wherein the patterns of phenotypes do not coincide with those that were presented in the Mendelian laws of inheritance. It also describes the inheritance of traits linked to a single gene in the chromosomes.
In Mendelian inheritance, the genes and their corresponding traits are handed down or passed down from the parents to their offspring by means of the dominant and recessive allele. In Mendel's findings, each trait is controlled by a single gene, and each gene has only two alleles, which can be a dominant or recessive. But most genes do not meet at this criteria. We call it as the modified Mendelian ratios. Example: what if we cross a homozygous red rose flower represented by the symbol capital C superscript R, capital C superscript R, and another homozygous white rose flower represented by the symbol capital C superscript W and capital C superscript W? What color could possibly be the dominant and recessive? By the way, before we go any further, the small letter like an exponent is called a superscript. It indicates the different alleles. In this case, we used superscript R as red and superscript W as white, while the big letter C is just a representation of the given cross. Okay, let us proceed with the Punnett square. Same thing, we will just distribute each allele in each grid. From the result of the Punnett square, can we tell now what could be the possible color of the rose flower?
When you cross a homozygous dominant, red, with homozygous recessive, white, the F1 would be heterozygote, and the phenotype is intermediate, meaning it will not express red but it will be expressing pink.
Based on the result of the given cross, it did not express red nor white. Instead, it expressed a pink rose flower. They met at the middle. We call it as incomplete dominance, meaning there is no dominance, but rather the result is intermediate between the two parentals.
Have you ever seen a chicken which looks like this? Or a cow with spots on its body? This is a product of another pattern of inheritance called codominance.
For example, coat color in horses. You cross red by white. Red is homozygous dominant, white is homozygous recessive. So the alleles coming from the parents, you have the gametes. So the F1 would be heterozygote, and the heterozygote will be roan.
What is roan? It refers to coat color of an organism with pattern characterized by an even mixture of colored and white hairs on the body. Example is a roan horse and a roan cattle. Again, we have codominance where both alleles are equally expressed, while in incomplete dominance, alleles blend.
Do you know what your blood type is? Have you ever wondered where your blood type came from? We are familiar that Gregor Mendel proposed that there must be two alleles in a gene pair. Generally speaking, there are three blood types: dominant A, B, and O. But because we humans are diploid individuals, meaning to say the number of alleles would be 2, our blood type will also be a combination of two alleles.
So if your blood type is A, your possible genotype could be AA or AO. If your blood type is B, the possible genotype would be BB or BO. And my blood type is O, so the only genotype I have would be an OO. And then if your blood type is AB, then your genotype would be AB.
So, when we talk about our blood type, we are pertaining to the multiple alleles because it is controlled by more than two alleles A, B, and O.
Some genes affect many different characteristics, not just a single characteristic. We call it as pleiotropy. Are you familiar with sickle cell anemia? When we look at the red blood cell of a person who has this disease, instead of it having spherical shape or biconcave shape, it has become abnormal, turned into sickle shape.
This could result to a lot of complications. So in terms of transporting oxygen to the different parts of the body, it will be very, very inefficient. So there would be high activity in the heart, in the lungs. There would be overactivity in the bone marrow, etc., etc. It could also result to tower skull.
Again, pleiotropy is when one gene affects multiple characteristics. There is an allele that causes death in an individual. It is called lethal allele. A classic example of an allele that affects survival is the lethal yellow allele, a spontaneous mutation in mice that makes their coats yellow. Mice that are homozygous genotype die early in development. Although this particular allele is dominant, lethal alleles can be dominant or recessive and can be expressed in homozygous or heterozygous conditions. Why did it die? In this diagram, we will cross two homozygous yellow mice. Notice that the mice with 2 superscript Y died because both of it contains the affected alleles. How about the 2 yellow survivors? Both of them will not die because they are just the carrier of the lethal allele. But it doesn't mean that though the lethal allele behaved in a recessive manner, they can still pass it to the next generation. How about the brown? The brown mice survived because it did not get any lethal allele from its parents.
So there are 2 types of lethal alleles or little genes. One would be recessive and the other one is dominant. So if recessive lethal, this means that the homozygous recessive will die. So a good example would be Tay-Sachs disease. So normal, a baby can be born normal, but before that baby would reach, let's say 4 years old, the baby will die. So there's something missing. There's an enzyme, the gene missing, there's an enzyme missing. So therefore, the organism will die. Another example would be if you have seen, for example, a cat with congenital absence of the tail. That cat carries a recessive lethal gene. That cat will never die because the genotype is heterozygous. But if the animal is homozygous recessive, then the animal will die.
There are traits that is visible to the eyes, or simply those that we can observe physically, like flower color, coat colors in animals, etc. We call those as qualitative traits. There is another exception to Gregor Mendel's pattern of inheritance, and we call it as polygenic inheritance, meaning a trait is controlled by more than one gene. Are you dreaming to have a celebrity-look child in the future, with tall height, with white skin complexion and blue eyes? Or do you want to see how your girlfriend would look like in the future? Well, it is possible through polygenic trait.
Height is a quantitative trait. Polygenic, meaning many genes will be controlling the trait. But the contribution of every gene will just be small. So if, for example, you want to have children who would be taller than you have to find someone who is bigger than you. That is thinking about your children in the future, right? And then, of course, you don't rely solely on the genes, but you need to consider the environment. Environmental factors would include, let's say, nutrition, while the baby is inside the womb of the mother, while the baby is growing, then, of course, health condition. So if you are, let's say, if you are single and you have, let's say, a girlfriend, and you like a girlfriend with a perfect body, 36, 24, 36. If you want to see the appearance of your girlfriend 40 years from now, all you have to do is look at her mom. If her mom is big, chances are your future wife will also be big.
We should also remember that in polygenic trait, environmental factors, health condition, and nutrition has a very big role.
Intelligence quotient, or IQ, is a quantitative trait, polygenic in nature, because it is influenced by many genes highly affected by the environment, type of education, health, and nutrition. So, even though a child shows a great potential, but if the child is always sick and undernourished, the reasons for the child to be absent in school, expected that the maximum potential of the child cannot be observed. Okay, there we have it, the terms that we will be discussing in this topic.
Again, we have the following: incomplete dominance, codominance, multiple alleles, pleiotropy, lethal allele, and polygenic trait. Some traits are controlled by sex-related inheritance. In humans, sex is determined by XX chromosomes for females and XY chromosomes for males. Sex-related inheritance can be categorized in three ways. A. Sex-linked traits, which are determined by genes located on the sex chromosomes. B. The sex-influenced traits, which will occur when phenotypes are different between males and females with the same genotype. C. Sex-limited traits, those traits that can only be expressed in one sex or the other. Let us simplify things by looking at the illustration on your screen. An example of this is the pattern of baldness in humans. The presence of hair as a characteristic has two forms: baldness, capital B positive, and full hair, capital B negative. Capital B positive is dominant in males, but recessive in females. Hence, it requires two capital B positive to cause baldness in females. In addition, the presence of testosterone levels influences the expression of the baldness allele. Higher levels of the testosterone hormone in males cause the baldness gene to be dominant, while its lower levels in females make it recessive. This trait is also called male pattern baldness. Several sex-linked genes have also been discovered in human beings.
Wow, it seems that the male has a higher chance to have it because we only have one X chromosome. Uh-oh. Okay, so we have sex-linked, sex-limited, and sex-influenced traits. For our first learning task, we will examine sample problems. We will use the same genotypes to determine the offspring of the crosses between male and female. Find the genotype, genotypic, and phenotypic ratio of the offspring.
Male pattern baldness is a recessive sex-linked trait, wherein affected people become bald. Sample test cross X capital B, no baldness, dominant, and X small b, male pattern baldness, recessive.
We have to use our Punnett square to solve the problem.
We will make 4 grids. Secondly, let us assign the given alleles in each grid. Remember that we will always put the dominant allele first, followed by the recessive allele. We will assign the male pattern on the top and the female pattern on the left of the grid. Now, we will fill out the Punnett square. There we have it. We just filled each grid with the combinations of each allele.
Let us identify the genotypes and phenotypes based on the results of the gene expression in each grid. We have the following.
On the upper left grid, the genotypes are the dominant allele for no baldness in females and the recessive allele for male pattern baldness. Based on the result of the gene expressions, the phenotype for this is a female normal. On the lower left grid, we have the genotypes for a recessive allele for baldness in females and the recessive allele for male pattern baldness. Based on this gene expression, we have the phenotype for female bald. On the upper right grid, we have the dominant allele for no baldness in females and a Y chromosome for male. Based on the gene expression, we have the phenotype for male normal. On the lower right grid, the genotypes are a recessive allele for baldness in females and a Y chromosome. The phenotype of this gene expression is a male bald.
But we are not done yet, because we will also identify the genotypic and the phenotypic ratio.
We will just classify or group the gene expression with the same pattern. And remember, each grid represents 25%. And since we have 4 grids, we have a total of 100%. Based on the Punnett square, we have 25% for X dominant and X recessive, 25% for X recessive and X recessive, 25% for X dominant and Y, and 25% for X recessive and Y. Now, let us identify the phenotypic ratio. We have 25% for female normal, 25% for female bald, 25% for male normal, and 25% for male bald.
Wow, it seems a bit complicated, but if you will do it again and again, it will just be easier for you and you will say, just a piece of cake. Now, I want you to think of someone you know and that whose parents you also know. It could be a friend, a churchmate, a colleague.
Think of their parents' traits. Are they equally being shown by their child? In the next activity, you will investigate the genetic trait of a flower color in snapdragons, which does not follow Mendel's law of dominance. Recalling Mendel's law of dominance, one allele can mask the expression of another allele when they are joined together. Therefore, if a person has a heterozygous genotype, or one dominant allele and another recessive allele, he or she will show the dominant phenotype. Example is physical traits, multiple alleles. Mendel studied just 2 alleles of his P genes, but real populations of 10 have multiple alleles of a given gene. In this activity, you will learn how to cross the gene for coat color in rabbits, the C gene, which comes in 4 color alleles. Capital C, capital C, CH recessive, capital C recessive H, and small c, as shown by the figure in your screen. Using the given genotypes, find the F1 and F2 generation of the crossed black rabbit and chinchilla, and the cross of the Himalayan and albino. Use the Punnett squares in your screen to guide you. Now for your last activity, grade 9. Create a family tree showing the F1 and F2 generations of your mother's and father's side. Describe the dominant traits that appear in both families. Illustrate your answer in your notebook. Seeing this episode will perhaps make you want to be with your family and see for yourselves from whom you got your genes. Keep tuning in here on DepEd TV as we discuss more science topics next meeting. This is DepEd TV!